Present.
President Green. Alderman Devoti. We have 5 present. We have quorum.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. With that, we have established a quorum for today's meeting. The next order of business will be approval of the minutes. I will take a motion to approve the minutes from the Budget and Public Employees Committee from Wednesday, November 19th, 2025.
So moved.
It was moved by the Alderwoman from the 7th, seconded by the President of the Board. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderwoman Sanier.
Aye.
Vice Chair Browning.
Aye.
Alderwoman Velasquez.
Aye.
Alderman Devoti. Chair Aldrich.
Aye.
President Green. Alderman Devoti. 5 aye votes.
Thank you. With that, we have approved the minutes from Wednesday, November 19th, 2025. Item number 4 will be board bills for review. Do not have any. That was item number 4. Item number 5, resolutions for review. There is none. Item number 6 is committee discussion. Item number 1 under committee discussion will be the RAM settlement interest money. Today, we will continue our monthly meeting that we are having at the Board of Aldermen to get updates from the Recovery Office on where we are with the interest money. Several months ago, the Board of Aldermen passed a board bill sponsored by President Green and co-sponsored by myself to allocate $30 million of the interest money from RAMS to help people that was impacted by the tornado. As always, thank Alderman Browning during those conversations and discussions of the bill and drafting it. He made he added language in the bill that would force the Board of Aldermen to meet on a monthly basis to continue to get updates on where the funds are going. So with that, we'll jump right in. For everybody that is in the room, if you would like a packet, there is packets up front next to our fabulous clerk. If you also would like to sign in, there's a sign-in sheet to be able to testify, also next to our fabulous clerk. With that, we will call up the Recovery Office to give an update, presentation from the PowerPoint that is in front of us. And we're honored today to have Mr. Julian Nix here with us. Mr. Nix, just please state your first and last name and the department you're with and proceed whenever you're ready.
Can you all hear me? Great. So Julian Nix, the Chief Recovery Officer, Office of Mayor Kara Spencer. Awesome. Well, first, thank you all for allowing us to speak before you all. So I'll start off by maybe just giving an overall overview of where we are, and to Jim to do a lot more of the deep dive. And excuse my voice, I think I'm losing it, but we'll make it through anyway. So just as kind of a general overview, and this is more so for those who have not been here before, most of this update is intended to focus on Recovery Office funding transparency updates, similar to what Alderman Aldridge just introduced, to give an overall funding and spending across the recovery effort. So we'll continue to provide that higher level context, because that's a bigger amount than just talking about the $30 million, and then we'll do the deep dive into the status of the Recovery Office Fund, specifically the $30 million, but we'll also start to introduce into here, also being able to report out on the $13.7 million that we're thankful that the Board of Aldermen passed for Board Bill 93, 94, and 95, focusing on housing and winter shelters. Both case management and broader service needs, as well as launching our neighborhood vision and planning efforts. And so as we look at that, those are really the 4 core priorities. So as we talk funding, all the funding conversations are really trying to show how the funding is driving alignment alongside these 4 goals from a current allocation standpoint. So for the public, as we talk about it, I like to talk about it first. What matters is what are we trying to and aiming to deliver, and then how are we aligning the funding to support the operations we're trying to deliver on the ground. So just a few comments high level that I'll put around the programs just to kind of level set for where we are. So we are early still in the housing and shelter work. Most of our work has been in alignment with early emergency shelter and the early hotel work and home repair work. But the focus for kind of the last will have been our Code Blue activations, which many have a lot about, which is really around how we have mobilized the money that was supported by the Board of Alders to support sheltering efforts, with more housing efforts coming online in the course of the next week or so from our team. From a debris and demolition and unsafe structures and repairs, we've launched the private property assistance application that's still ongoing for people to sign up for both the demolition and debris removal program as well as the repair program. The demolition debris removal program, the city is responsible for primarily getting the right of entry, but the state is responsible for the actual debris removal and demolition, and then the repair side is an effort the city is overseeing. And then we have our resident support work that is ongoing, largely through the direct support coming through some of the United Way Fund, which we'll talk more about. So just a little bit of an overview. This is a new sheet that the Recovery Office has started to pull together. We know that there's been a lot of funds across the federal government, the state, and the city that have gone into recovery efforts. Some of that has been direct allocations. Some of that has been previous funds, whether it be CDBG, ARPA, or other dollars that, where possible, have been targeted as putting money more into the recovery zone to support recovery efforts. And so total identified thus far, not all this has been deployed, that's been allocated overall to recovery efforts has been about $423 million, with $120 million of that being focused dollars from the city, which includes the $30 million and the other $13.7 million recently allocated by the Board of Aldermen. There's about $200 million that's been roughly allocated from our federal partners, and then about $103 million for the state. And as we look at the city allocated $120 million, about $98 million of that has already been contracted or committed, and about $52 million of that $120 million has been spent. And what we also tried to do here was give a good overview around what the different programs are that we have set up for which fundings are going. And the way we think about it is some of these buckets get both federal and state support, and then we try to use the city money to fill in a lot of the gaps where we can for our top priorities. And so you can see within housing, we think of it as our shelter program, which is not long-term, which is both all of our shorter-term housing-related efforts to rehouse people immediately into shelter or into hotels. There's our home stabilization and repair program, which is the private property assistance specifically focused on stabilization and repair. There's our housing and rental assistance program, which we're rolling out. There's our vacant unit turn program, which we funded a lot to bring units online for residents to move into. We have what's the FEMA housing assistance and the dollars allocated from there, as well as long-term housing dollars that have been identified as potential sources to invest in the zone through ARPA, CDBG, and other allocations. For debris and infrastructure, we think of our public debris removal program, that's the removal of debris from the right-of-way. There's our demolition debris removal program on private property. There's our emergency demolition program that has been ongoing, really those that have created a public safety threat to those adjacent properties or to public right-of-ways. And then there's our sidewalk and tree restoration program. And then there's the city infrastructure, our traffic lights and things like that were really early in it. And then the Clean Up Our Community, which is the dollars we've put to provide dumpsters and cleanup support, restrooms, porta potties to groups doing cleanup efforts on the ground. And then our support programs is really what supports residents, which is our disaster case management work and all of the casework that goes into that. Our resident support services, which is anything from food, supplies, legal services, mental health support, any program that kind of provides some more direct services that are usually money that no one will see the city on it. They'll see the community groups who provide those services as the front-facing group providing those services. Then we have business supports, and then we have our other FEMA program, and then our initial city emergency response. So, and then of course we have our administrative expenses that happen within the recovery office and cost recovery. So these are just the full sets of buckets that exist of where funding is going that we thought were important. We'll spend the time in this meeting mostly going through high level the 120 city funds, and then we'll spend even more time going more in depth on the 43.7 million, which is the focus of this committee. So just as a little bit of highlights and overview kind of for where we are. So the total city recovery funding that's been identified and that we're starting to put toward this effort is about $120 million, up about $25 million since our last meeting about a month ago on October 29th. 14 million of that came from Board Bill 93, 94, and 95, 13.7 million to be exact. There's about 8 million that has been in emergency spending that are ultimately reimbursable costs that are running through Fund 1103, and then we have about 3 million in federal state grants that, as we reviewed ARPA, reviewing sources that either have already been deployed into the zone or already plan to be deployed in the zone, but being redeployed in thoughtful ways are all being shown there. We've, out of the 120 million, about 98 million of it has been awarded, which is up about 14 million from our last conversations, and about 52 million has been spent. What I'll say is a little bit, in case there's a question around the gap, a lot of that is the dollars that have been identified by CDA as dollars that can be repurposed. So we have not contracted that, and then the remainder of that is largely the unspent portions of Board Bill 93, 94, and 95 that we have not yet allocated. So as we move a little bit more into RAM's interest, but also operating reserve funding, recognizing that Board Bill 31, and was it Board Bill 93 or 94?
31, 93.
Yeah, so they come from a mixture of RAM's interest and operating reserve. So that's the total that we'll start talking through, which is we have about 43.7 million that's been allocated to this purpose. So 37.3 million has been awarded, which is up about 13.2 million since our last meeting. So we've been awarding a lot thanks to ENA for supporting that broader kind of effort. So 19.6 million in contracts have been executed of that 37.3 million, so about 53%, up from about 11.9 million that has been awarded over since the last meeting to actual obligated on contracts. One of the things that I'll continue to say is that a lot of our operators, a lot of our contractors deploy ahead of a contract, and then many of them certainly deploy ahead of an invoice or paid out. So we will see a lag between actual spending and contracting relative to services that might actually appear on the ground. The United Way has completed awards of about 6.8 million of 9.5 million. There's about 2.3 million left in resource hubs, and then there's also the 1 million in unmet needs that they're spending down. And then there's probably about 0.4 million in unawarded emergency funds now that we've closed out the emergency grants. That's been largely closed out. I think there's one more grant pending, which Jim will talk a little bit more about later, but that portion of the fund, which is about 3.5 million, has been fully allocated. We continue to work to improve the time from ENA approval to contract execution, which I know we've talked a lot about in this hearing. Overall, we've gotten it down by about 50%. So on average, when we looked at July and August, I believe, we were at closer to about 50 days as the average time for from ENA approval to contract execution. That's been brought down to 26 days. We're still seeing large delays out of CDA for their contracts, some of it for just the nature of those contracts, but some of it also is process things that we have to work through to improve. So that's a core area that we'll be focused on as we look at the next month ahead. We have set internal targets of 30 days for new contracts for any contracts that come through Special ENA and that come through the Recovery Office. And I've even told folks if it's not going to get through in 30 days, don't push it to ENA as if it's an emergency, and trying to push that more through within our respective groups with the goal of 15 days for amendments. So we have been hitting these new targets for most of the most recent contracts. We know we will miss it for some, but we're trying to set clear goals and goalposts to help drive the ambition. And we're trying to turn around anything that comes into the Recovery Office, not necessarily our departments, 48 hours from when we receive the invoice to getting that to the Comptroller's office, and the Comptroller's office usually processes within 2 to 3 days, but they've been probably 7 days has been the max that we've seen, but they've usually been great at partnering to get that out within a couple days. So we still have more than 26 million of eligible costs have now been submitted to FEMA for reimbursement, so we continue to see progress in the cost recovery efforts to drive that directly with our FEMA partners. So that's kind of the high level. Jim will go a lot more in depth in each of these, but wanted to provide an overall summary of where we are. So this sheet just kind of indicates that where that 120 million of city funds is. We want to make sure it's clear where those dollars are going across our core priorities from housing to debris, the resident support and recovery office. So you can see that the lion's share of dollars continue to flow into housing and debris and infrastructure, then with about 23 million in resident support and then 1.7 million in the recovery office. And then we've broken out the sources of funds by the major groups, how much is coming from city emergency spending, how much is coming from our federal and state funds that we're retargeting, how much is coming from the RAM Settlement Interest Board Bill 31, and how much is coming from the new Board Bill 93, 94, and 95 that have ultimately been passed. So that's kind of where we are with that. And then this sheet, or the next page, we also want to get a clear view of where we are kind of from a budget versus awarded versus contracted versus spent. So think of budgeted as it is either formally in a budget or it has been announced from our view as intended for a particular area or for source. Awarded means a contract has gone through ENA or whatever the form of an obligation is. So if we have an existing contract, it also could mean it has a requisition or a PO to an existing city contract, but it means it's been approved through the regulatory aspects of our process to be spent. And then contracted means it's a formalized contract that's in place, and then spent is the dollars that are actually out the door from an expenditure standpoint. So where we stand right now, we have about 98 million again of that 120 million awarded. We have about 56.4 million that has been contracted, with about 51.9 million to be spent. And again, a lot of work starts at the moment it's awarded. Even if we're still working through a contract, that will use the ENA letter as a notice to proceed, and then contract is the official kind of terms, and then the invoicing process. So with that, I will turn it over to Jim to do a deeper dive into the 43.7 million.
So my name is Jim Hill, and I'm the Chief Cost Recovery Officer. And as Julian said, we'll move into a deeper dive. So this is a chart that we've shared before. It had, and it's in the appendix of the document too, it originally just had the $30 million allocated. So this includes the additional 13.7 million from Board Bills 93, 94, and 95. And you can see that it has all been allocated in the housing bucket, which it also includes 6.7 million for the winter shelters across Board Bills 94 and 95. But 2 million added to home repair, 6.7 million for winter shelters, 1 million for additional vacant unit turns, and then we added deposit and rental assistance. Originally was $1 million. We added $3 million for that, and as Julian mentioned, that program is launching as we speak, and then $1 million for the impacted tenants fund. The other areas stayed the same. In terms of a deep dive into the different programs, the Disaster Resource Hub operations, those grants run by the United Way are largely complete. There was one remaining applicant that was being evaluated this afternoon, but other than that, they're complete. And the $2.3 million awarded to 48 applicants. There was 21 applications denied, totaling $1.7 million. The bulk was that because they were either not nonprofits, which was a requirement, or they didn't have documentation to support their requested reimbursements. We reallocated $468,000 from nonprofit operational grants to fund 24 disaster case managers for a full year. And then depending on the remaining grant that was being evaluated this afternoon, there's $400,000 and potentially more of funds that will be available here that can be reallocated to other uses. In terms of disaster case management, again, and this is a consistent story, that $2.345 million to fund 24 FTEs. We now have 19 hired and working. At the last meeting on October 29th, there were 10, so we've hired, trained, and have deployed 9 since then. And then we submitted a disaster case management application to FEMA on September 5th, and we're waiting to hear about that. On the unmet needs, it's $1 million, and those will be distributed by the disaster case manager as they continue to work with the tornado victims. We have awarded, we set aside $750,000 for legal services. We've awarded $727,000 to legal services of Eastern Missouri. So there's a little bit remaining to be reallocated. We set aside $450,000 for hunger relief. We've awarded $429,000. No, I'm sorry. We set aside $500,000. We were awarded $450,000. We have $21,000 left. $200,000 for mental health. We've awarded Better Family Life, and all these awards have been since the last time we were together. And so a lot of great progress on the United Way. Really excited. We'll be in a position after this week to really celebrate the completion of those awards. In terms of nonprofit cooling and heating, we had a NOFA for warming centers. We didn't get much of a response, so we're going to reallocate those funds as needed to warming centers and sheltered tornado operations as we go forward. And then we got a NOFA closing on Friday for tornado recovery zone heating utility assistance, and so we'll know about that, and that's $500,000. In terms of the disaster resource hub operations, this again was another United Way administered grant, $1.5 million. We awarded $250,000 to 314 Oasis for a stopgap resource hub, and that will be in operation through December. With these funds, we're also providing, the city is purchasing supplies for the resource zones. And then for the balance of the funds here, we're finalizing a strategy to set up longer-term resource hubs that will operate for a year and to continue to support the tornado zone. We awarded $1.2 million to Diamond Divas for logistics and to operate the warehouse. And then we've got $300,000 to purchase supplies, and we continue to purchase supplies against that, cots, blankets, stuff like that. And then we have $500,000 set aside for the warehouse relief that will expire in April. We're using the Monarch facility. It's a CDA facility that will be sold, so we're going to have to move out of that warehouse into another site, and this $500,000 is set up to cover that lease. In terms of home repair, we now have $7 million for that. A little over $2 million was set up for the Healthy Home Repair Program earlier in the recovery period, and that's administered through CDA with Mission STL involved. To date, we've repaired 11 homes, and we've got 15 in process. And then we recently awarded a $4.85 million contract to SLS for home repair construction management. They are a leading disaster response firm that has lots and lots of experience helping communities repair homes after disasters. So in Puerto Rico, it's a different home stock, but they've repaired 80 homes a month or something like that. So they will significantly accelerate our stabilization and home repair operations. And then winter shelter operations, we set aside $6.7 million for that. We've awarded $4.3 million in contracts, $2 million to Peter and Paul as the fiscal agent for the St. Louis Continuum of Care. And given the winter weather we've had in November and then since Thursday, they've been very active in terms of housing citywide residents impacted by unhoused residents and including those that are impacted by the tornado. And then we've engaged Tetra Tech for a contract they're going to be the program administration for all of the sheltering operations, including the non-congregate shelter. And SLS, who is going to run, to the extent we need congregate sheltering, they will administer that. And then they are also going to be the transportation administrator. To help those impacted by the tornado navigate the housing needs, we've got a contract with Tower Grove CDC, and they're already involved in some of our applications to help residents find vacant units. But this is going to be a modification to their current application to directly connect those that were impacted by the tornado and need housing to landlords. And then we continue to award contracts for vacant unit turns. We've got about $3.4 million that we've awarded to date. Some of those are slower going because of the contracting delays by CDA. We're going to bring another $600,000 of vacant unit turn contracts to next week's special E&A meeting. So we'll continue to push ahead on the vacant unit turns. In terms of deposit and rental assistance, one of the things that we were able to do with Board Bills 94 and 95 is add $3 million to the deposit and rental assistance fund that we have. So now we have $4 million available for that. It is being administered by an organization named Forward that we have worked with in the past. The program design has been finalized, and the rental assistance is launching this week as we speak. The Impacted Tenants Fund, we've got a pilot going with a company, and we're waiting to see how that goes. And if that pilot works out well, then that will determine how these funds get allocated there. The Red Cross, very early on, we had a contract with the Red Cross for $500,000, and that was to help tornado victims transition from shelters into intermediate housing. That contract is complete. The Red Cross only needed $87,000 of those $500,000 of funds. So we're going to be able to repurpose $413,000 to another firm that is going to do more housing work with a real sprint in December to identify impacted families and get them rental assistance and find them appropriate housing during the winter. In terms of debris removal, we had a $5 million contract we awarded Tetra Tech for right of entry and hazardous assessment, intake, and administration. That program was launched in mid-October. It's moving along. We've got 768 applications that have been received. We've got 100 homes or so that have been through the title search process with a clear title, and we'll be able to start doing the hazardous assessments and then the triage between demo and repair. We also have set up an outreach center in the Urban League on Natural Bridge for the recovery office as a place where tornado victims can come in and get services and support that they need. And then we've got about $400,000 set aside for dumpsters, porta potties, the AmeriCorps private property debris removal work that they're doing on behalf of the city. And we continue to, as needs arise, those funds are available to support the community debris removal. And then no real changes in the recovery office. It's fully staffed. We've had a lot of great success with the FEMA cost recovery with $26 million submitted to date. And then we did engage with Key Strategic Group for recovery office capacity, and they're also playing a big role in facilitating the activities with the neighborhood and community and civic organizations. This was a slide that we shared in the last meeting in terms of actions to date we've done to improve procurement. These are all in operation. We've standardized the fast track process. We've got a standing RFP committee that includes Jay Nelson from the Board of Aldermen, Don Neese from the Comptroller's Office. They've been very, very responsive and supportive. And given we had 15 contracts executed in November, we had a lot of meetings and 3 A&A meetings. And we couldn't have done that without the willingness and flexibility of this group to support that activity. We have launched weekly contracting meetings to get the departments and the city councilor's office together to talk about contracts. And for those that were running into challenges, to knock down those challenges and learn from each other and really identify some of the process improvement opportunities that need to happen. And then the Oracle contracting module was launched in mid-November, and that's going to help a lot. This is, Julian referred to some of this in his previous comments, but you can see this is the left-hand part of the slide is total contracts awarded, and then next to that is the contracts executed. And you can see the progress that we've made from July, August, 51 days, to September, 40 days, October, 26 days, and now we're working on 15 contracts from November. But really, the keys have been, one of the big keys has been the recovery office, me, learning all the steps that's required to get a contract through the city processes, which has been a huge help. We also have dedicated legal support, so we have 3 attorneys that are pretty much full-time dedicated to these recovery office contracts. And one of the things that has been very helpful is we go through selection committees and we make a selection, Those usually come about a week before the special E&A meeting. They're able to start working on the contract immediately with the selected vendor. So by the time we get to the E&A and there's an approval, we've got a very solid working draft. And then it's just a matter of then finalizing that draft and then working it through all the different city steps in the process. The Comptroller's office has been incredible. Both the Comptroller and the Register prioritize tornado recovery contracts. So we typically get an almost immediate turnaround when contracts are in their departments. And again, I mentioned this Oracle contracting. One of the things that it's going to do from a workflow perspective, we will be able to know where the contract is at any point in time, and that will save countless days at many steps in the process where stuff just gets stuck in a bin somewhere and you don't know where it is. So a lot of success there, although we have a lot of work to do with the November contract. In terms of public assistance cost recovery, we've already mentioned this. More than 26 million has been submitted. We expect to submit another 3 or 4 million by the end of December. The challenge we have right now, though, we've only gotten $88,000 of reimbursements from FEMA. Part of that is there's a normal lag in terms of the time, but the government shutdown has really, really hurt. So they're back, which is great, but there's a lot of catching up to do to get us to get some of these reimbursements flowing back into the city. Julian.
Perfect. So just to talk a little bit about what our current priorities are for the next month. One, of course, it's our winter outreach and housing efforts for all our unhoused, including tornado, which is both continuing to expand our congregate and non-congregate shelter services for the unhoused. So I think we've gone from about 120 beds to over 285 beds with surge capacity of about 350 in our congregate shelters since we started our Code Blue activation. We're looking to bring that online to at least 600, but also to bring on more non-congregate shelters. So continue to expand that will be a core focus with the funding that we've received. The second is launching the down payment and rental assistance with Forward. So that program will be launching next week for more of a public perspective. I did want to caveat to say that will be more of a direct outreach to folks who we know are there from a tornado perspective as we kind of look at that core program. And then we have the home stabilization repair program, leveraging the new construction management contractor, SLS. Most of those homes will start to see some of the work with inspections and things start over the course of this month, but we'll probably see the first house that SLS starts to do in batches happen at the beginning of the new year. So our bigger focus right now is getting people into stable housing, recognizing that if you haven't really started on repairs to your home, getting that ready to be for winter or the winter that we're in right now isn't going to be a sufficient option. So the second is we still continue to work on the scope and timing of the debris and demolition removal with FEMA and the state of Missouri. It has been frustratingly slow, to be transparent, but we also recognize that the processes and things around it are really strict, and then working especially to make sure that it's reimbursable by FEMA adds to that, especially with all the constant changes. So we continue to work through that with our partners, but our biggest focus from a city continues to be on right of entry and the assessments and structural inspections. We did launch the private property assistance dashboard online, so that is now public. We did not do a formal public announcement because we wanted to pilot it, test it, make sure it was working, but people can go on and at least have properties applied for private property assistance in their area. So you can see which parcel and which house has applied. And our hope is that alders, you all can help, but also the broader community can help start to identify neighbors or other people who haven't applied that should apply. It doesn't have any personal identifiable information, but it does have the address of the specific parcel that has applied for support. The other piece is to complete we have our next special E&A on December 10th. We know we have at least 10 contracts that'll be coming through for 60 vacant unit turns. So we'll continue to roll that out, but some other contracts that'll probably come through that meeting as well that we have finalized. I'll let Jim talk more about it because I know we may have had 1 or 2 more that came in today. The other big piece is you saw in the chart that Jim previously supported that showed the Affordable Housing Commission and CDA contracts are still the large number of contracts that are still left outstanding. One of the things that we have set up is we recognize that some of those processes, because you're doing repairs to property, it just actually has a much longer legal process to get those contracts through. So one of the things we have been working to set up with some of our nonprofit partners is to launch a pilot program with a nonprofit partner and a for-profit bank to basically provide the bridge capital between city funding from an E&A letter to project execution. That's backed by a loan loss reserve fund. So that program will help so that the timing of our contracts and getting those finalized are not what drive the contingency on these groups being able to begin the construction work. So this has been an effort we've been working on for the last 2 months that we finally have gotten ironed out and think we'll be ready for a public announcement and making that directly available to all of those who qualify for vacant unit turns to be able to access. And then again, we'll continue to work to accelerate the contract execution really toward our goals of 30 days for contracts or new contracts and then 15 days for amendments to existing contracts. And with that, we'll turn it back over to Alderman Aldridge and the committee for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Nixon. Mr. Jim, I will go in order of seniority with members on the committee if they may have questions on the presentation, starting with Alderwoman Sanier. Or, sorry, starting with Alderman Browning, Vice Chair Browning.
Hey, thank you, Jim and Julian. Really appreciate the update and the organization. I think it's not a question of how difficult this has been for the city, and I really appreciate just how you presented the information as well as explaining the difficulties that have come up as we've been trying to meet the needs of the people that have been affected by this disaster. It's not been, I think, clear the entire time, and that's not your fault. That is what happens when a city has to grapple with a disaster of this scale and turn around on a dime and start, figuring out how to be the disaster response that typically we would not have to figure out how to be in a normal situation. So I appreciate the amount of information that you provide tonight, as well as the quick pivot when the snow hit to realize that tornado relief is tied to the snowfall and the needs this winter, and to treat them both as the emergency that they are. So I just, again, want to express my gratitude to you and my support in going forward. I think that this has been done as well as possible given the tools we have, but no question that we need to continue to try to do better, and I think you've tried to do that every step of the way. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Browning.
Alderwoman Sanier.
Thank you, Chairman. I would actually like to wait for public comment before asking my questions and giving my comments if possible. And thank you all for coming out today. I know it's a late Wednesday evening, so just thank you all for being present.
Alderwoman Velasquez.
Thank you, Chair Aldrich. I would also like to wait for public comment.
Madam President.
I'm going to hold for public comment as well.
All right, with that, we will wait to public comment to ask any questions. For everybody that is in the room who will be testifying, Madam Clerk, do we have anybody online as well? One moment. Yes, ma'am. Oh, one person. All right. Well, the individual who is online, if you can turn your camera on. Again, for the person that is online, if you want to turn your camera on. I have interest. Okay.
We may want to come back to them. They keep declining.
Okay. For the person online, if you eventually want to testify, just raise your hand or turn your camera on so we can see you in the room, and we will add you to the comment list. Everyone that is in the room that is here to testify, could you please raise your right hand? Everyone, do you swear to tell the truth? Keep your hand up. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? All right, we will go in order of how people signed up from the sheet that the clerk has. Everyone will have 3 minutes. And whenever the clerk is ready, she will call you up. Please state your first and last name as well as the ward you reside in. Representative Collins, did you want to testify? All right, Representative Collins.
Yes,
Got it. All right, Ms. Collins, do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
yes.
All righty. We will start with in the room, and then we will switch to Ms. Collins after the first person. Madam Clerk, please call up the first person.
Miss Linda Portwood from the 11th Ward. Could you please let me know if you're in support or in opposition? Support. Thank you.
All right, and just make sure you get to the.
In support.
Okay, and you have 3 minutes. Please proceed.
Okay, my name is Linda Portwood, and I represent the 11th Ward in the Penrose Park neighborhood. I want to thank the committee for allowing me to tell my story. May 16th, please bear with me because this is new to
No
me.
problem. Just if you could talk into the mic as much as
Okay.
possible.
May 16, 2025 is a day I always remember because of the devastation and loss the tornado caused my community. Unfortunately, I was impacted by the tornado as well. My roof was damaged and the water is trickling down from the roof into my home, which is destroyed my walls. Also, my chimney was destroyed beyond recognition. My back porch and the awnings were also destroyed. So it's other damage that was also caused by the tornado as well. Let's see. My neighbor, my next door neighbor, and surrounding neighbors also sustained a lot of property damage as well. I grew up in North St. Louis, and I still reside in North St. Louis. And I see it once was a vibrant and rich neighborhood, not in wealth, but in community. I also would like to say that it really, really saddens me, and I get a little emotional when I think about how the tornado impacted my neighborhood. When I walk around and when I ride around the neighborhood and I see the dilapidated buildings, homes, abandoned neighborhood, streets, abandoned neighborhood schools, and local restaurants and neighborhoods vacant. I hope you can find it in your hearts and earmark the RAM settlement money to North St. Louis. Let me start all over, I'm sorry. I hope you can find it in your hearts to earmark the RAM settlement money to North St. Louis, the North Star, so we can rebuild and return to a rich and vibrant community that we once were, but even better. Thank you in advance for your consideration.
Thank you. And thank you for coming out. No, take your time. You did wonderful.
Thank you, Ms. Portwood. Next, we have online Ms. Kimberly Ann Collins.
All right, Ms. Collins, please say your first and last name, ward you reside in, and you have 3 minutes. You may proceed.
Okay, thank you. Forgive me because I'm driving. So I'm State Representative Kimberly Ann Collins. I represent the city of St. Louis in the Missouri House of Representatives, 103rd General Assembly, and I live in the 12th Ward of the city of St. Louis.
You may proceed.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for allowing me to give this testimony today. I just wanted to come up here and uplift a couple of things. So at the state level, when we went back to special session over the summer, I know I was steadfast focused on what is it that I can do for my district? And seeing that about 85% of my house district has been impacted by this tornado, it really does hit home, including my own home was impacted. And I had been displaced for a little bit until I, found the funds to fix up my own home. And so, of course, that process has been really hard. And for me as an elected official, I have to come out the house and still wear a shield, and still help folks as if I don't need help myself. But what I will say is we went back to special session and we appropriated 125 million, in which 100 of that went into funds directly to the city of St. Louis. And then the other 25 million went to the Missouri Housing Trust Fund that's being administered by MHDC. I bring that up because there are grassroots organizations who have been awarded funds by MHDC, who are really doing the work, but they get overlooked and overshadowed by bigger organizations in the city of St. Louis. And they also get overlooked by the city of St. Louis current administration. They don't get overlooked by me because this is a public list on MHDC's website. And you can see those organizations that got awarded. And so they either apply for funds for either home repair or funds for housing services. And some organizations actually applied for funds for both. And so many of these smaller grassroots organizations, such as like the Buchanan Foundation, which is in the Beta neighborhood, but serving impacted residents in the city of St. Louis. And then you have another organization that's a 501c3 organization in good standing. All of these organizations are in good standing with the state of Missouri, like Wherever We Are, Inc., which also is in the 12th Ward, and it sits on Kings Highway, a small organization ran by Julia Bourret, who is using everything that she has, every resource that she has. These organizations are helping folks through housing services, which include a number of eligible activities, from rental assistance to mortgage assistance to utility assistance, and they utilize those funds for hotel assistance. And then they've also been using those funds to help cover the costs of essential supplies and appliances that were lost in a home during the May 16th tornado. So when individuals who have been displaced found, connected with different landlords, they need essential supplies, they're able to utilize those funds for those needs as well. I say all of this to say that, and One Silver Star, these organizations, along with many others that are currently applying for these funds, and honestly, we just had a meeting today to award the next round. These organizations are overlooked, and they've never talked to anyone in the recovery office. And I would believe that individuals in the recovery office or in the mayor's office should make themselves available for those organizations, should make themselves available. It's okay for us to get out of our comfort zone and walk into those offices, which is public records, and say, hi, I'm such and such, and I lead the recovery office, or hi, I'm such and such, and I'm from the mayor's office. What can we do for you? Because that is what I did. I wasn't familiar with all of these organizations. Most of them I was, but for the ones that I was not familiar with, I made myself available and I showed up in real time to help them and ask them what did they need. Many of these organizations are not connected in real time to the landlord inventory list. And Julian, I know, sent me an email and has connected me with Ella Gross, but I'm saying it is almost 200 days plus later, and we knew that organizations were being awarded, but we constantly look over the smaller grassroots organizations that do receive housing disaster relief funds, but they don't get a call from the city of St. Louis to be a part of the conversations. That is what I have a problem with. I also have a problem that as a state representative, when I reach out and I inquire about things, I'm being treated as if I'm not an elected official, and I'm being treated as if I'm not organizing or trying to help folks on my end in my office. Now, these are my residents that elected me into office, and oftentimes they're calling my phone at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the morning, and I'm going to answer it at all times. So I want to say this to individuals in the mayor's administration, and I want to say this to anybody else that's listening, that are the powers that be in city government. If I'm reaching out to you all to ask a question, don't treat me as if I am just a regular citizen. I don't want to find out updates when my residents find out updates. I too want to be included in the conversations that you all are having behind closed doors. So I'm asking that the current mayor's administration make themselves available to those smaller grassroots organizations that have received funds that I know are working tooth, teeth, and nail in getting people placed into hotels and trying to find housing themselves. I ask that you all make yourselves available and show up to their front doors. The information is on MHDC's website under community programs. There is a public portal with the address, email, phone number, and how they choose to serve their intake process for residents that have been impacted. You all can show up, and I'm talking about the current mayor's administration.
Thank you, Ms. Collins.
Yes,
That's your
Catholic
time.
Charities. No, yes, Catholic Charities and Salvation Army have been a part of these conversations, but I'm talking about those smaller grassroots organizations that receive state dollars. They deserve to be a part because they're part of the recovery process too. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Next, Madam Chair.
Next, we have Ms. Teresa Wilkins of the 11th Ward.
While Ms. Wilkins is coming up, the person that is online with your, it looked like we froze. Okay. We'll come back to her. All right. Ms. Wilkins, they read your name, and you're in the 11th Ward, so whenever you're ready, you may.
Thank you for receiving me again. I am Teresa Wilkins, the 11th Ward, the O'Fallon neighborhood. I was impacted by the May 16th tornado. My house sustained roof damage. My back fence sustained damage. The trees, after the tornado hit, my backyard looked like a forest with the debris that was in there. The debris that came down also destroyed my back steps, the ledge for my back step. So it was destroyed. I have roof damage. I have chimney damage. And I want to say that I appreciate everything that has been done for the relief effort, even though more needs to be done. It was very humbling to sit in the dark for 6.5 days until they got my lights up. It was hard coming home every night to that dark space. So we thank you for the efforts. The light post was the tornado destroyed a light post. Couldn't understand, but it took almost until 2 weeks ago for the light post to be repaired. Again, being a single senior citizen, I need light when I come home in the evening time. My neighbors and I, we continue to need the support that these RAMS dollars will give us to get our properties back together. What we haven't heard is so many people don't have insurance, and that's been an obstacle to getting repairs done. So money put into stuff like Healthy Homes, we need that in order to get our lives back together. We are all citizens of St. Louis, and we want our city to be the best that it can be. But it's just disturbing when you drive in neighborhoods like driving down Newstead between, I think south of Natural Bridge. I don't recognize parts of that street anymore because the tornado came and devastated it. So whatever can be done expediently and in support of the RAMS money, I appreciate that you do it for us to get back to life as we know it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wilkins.
Thank you, Ms. Wilkins. Next, we have online Ms. Pat Miller.
All right. Miss.
Yes.
Good morning, Miss, or good evening, Miss Pat. If you could raise your right hand so we could swear you in.
Okay, I'm raising it.
All right, I see you. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
All right, Miss Miller, just state your first and last name, the ward you reside in. You have 3 minutes.
Okay, my name is Patricia Miller, and I live in the 10th Ward.
All right. You may proceed.
I am very disillusioned and disappointed with St. Louis Recovery. We thought that this was going to be a place where we could come and have our problems solved, a place where we could go to and talk to people who would encourage us. I am rebuilding my home at 1117 Baird. I called and I asked for a tarp. The people that they sent out did not know how to put the tarp on, and the tarp came off. And I just haven't seen any success stories when it comes to St. Louis Recovery. My house was broken into. If I had waited to call St. Louis Recovery, the house would still be unboarded. I had to advocate for myself and call the police department. And I got somebody to come over. So I'm just wondering, what type of services, do they have any success stories? Most people who have signed up have never been called back. There's a lot of theory going on, but what's concrete? I think that I was talking to a lady tonight at the planning meeting, and she said most of the people who were appointed to the committee for the mayor is recovery are under 40, and I'm way over 40. But I just don't, I'm very disillusioned and disappointed, because if the recovery was doing what they said they do, if I have an issue, then they should be able to handle it. If not handle it, acknowledge it and call me back. And I was in a meeting the other night with Dream Builders, and I understand that they were boarding up homes and putting on tarp, but nobody even told me about Dream Builders. So just what is the deal? And then there's the thing out there that people are not getting paid. Some people are saying that the St. Louis City Hall is calling them, telling them, we don't have money for contractors. So I'm just wondering, I'm a senior citizen, and I'm just wondering, you go through the neighborhood and it still looks like it did on May 16th. There is no signs of recovery anywhere. Anything you have to do, it takes 2 or 3 people if they call you back. So, I'm like I said, that was my hope. I was at the mayor's meeting, but it doesn't seem that there's any money to do anything. And for St. Louis City Hall to call a contractor, tell them, we're not going to pay you because we don't have any money, somebody needs to be able to explain that. And what evidence can you give me that there's a recovery going on? That's my statement.
Thank you, Ms. Patricia.
Next, we have Armand Walker.
You can hold it if you want. You don't have to. Okay.
Kind of have it there if I can.
All right. Just state your first and last name and the ward you reside in. You got 3 minutes.
All right. I am Armand Walker. I reside in Ward 2. I'm with the Party for Socialism and Liberation. I'm a lifelong resident of St. Louis. So I want to start by just recapping a couple of key facts that I'm aware of. So we know that at least 5,000 homes are in need of repairs after this tornado. We know that in September, Ameren disconnected 14,000 homes, and in October, 17,000. And yet, Ameren Rep. Patrick Brown sits on the Recovery Office. We also know on the Recovery Office Advisory Board. We also know on that board is Dustin Allison of Greater St. Louis, Inc. That is a company that has applauded the now canceled Israel Chemicals Limited project at 401 Adelaide Ave on the north side, a project that would have further polluted the air for an already vulnerable population, and a project that would further implicate St. Louis in the war crimes by that company of producing chemical weapons for the genocide in Gaza using U.S. tax dollars. That same project received an $8.2 million tax abatement by St. Louis Development Corporation. And SLDC is the same entity which met with Mayor Spencer in October to talk about loosening zoning laws and permit restrictions in historic districts. Meanwhile, Governor Kehoe has signed bills approving $1.5 billion in subsidies for the Kansas City sports teams, has signed bills overturning protections for low-income renters, and the list goes on. So it's clear that we have the money and the resources to rebuild, but we also have a political and economic system that is protecting big business and politicians and corporations before it is helping out the common people. These past couple of weeks, I joined Ali Rand and Carol B in the Academy neighborhood. They've been leading volunteer teams to help demo areas and homes that have been hit by the tornado. We were, hitting plaster with mold in it, tearing down old wooden planks, things of that nature, and just money from the Black and working class neighborhoods that are impacted by this tornado. Because yes, it is a natural disaster, but 6 months later, the inadequate response is completely man-made. So I'm going to wrap up by just recapping some of the key demands that I want to continue to emphasize whenever I come to these meetings: that there should be a complete ban on evictions, a rent and a mortgage freeze for impacted residents. We should pass a bill to ban property purchases in new development that is not for affordable housing. We should set up free mobile health clinics in all impacted zones, set up free aid distribution centers for food, water, and clothing, ensure impacted residents are receiving full insurance payouts because many are not, pause all non-essential city projects and direct funding to continue to fund the emergency shelters for the winter, and of course, allocate all of the RAM settlement funds to North City. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Bruce Hadley.
All right, Mr. Bruce, just state your first, last name, the ward you reside in, and then you have 3 minutes. You may proceed.
Yeah, my name is Bruce Hadley. I live in Ward 2, and thank you for these meetings, these listening meetings, and I come away with, questions that I can't answer right now, or I ask even, because it's quite overwhelming, I think. But before the second ward, I moved back to St. Louis in 2001 after 30 years away. But before I lived in the second ward, I lived in an apartment about 2 blocks south of that appropriately named Delmar Divide, where living conditions between north and south were very evident, right? I don't need to describe it to all of you, I'm sure, but it's why I'm motivated to give some input tonight. To summarize my 2 main opinions, I agree with others who have spoken at previous meetings and who have done so again this evening. And I hope that some of you alder people agree as well that, number one, that all RAM settlement funds, it sounds very simplistic, but all RAM settlement funds should be directed toward the tornado emergency and its recovery. For short-term needs such as winter housing, health needs, and so forth, and long-term rebuilding and infrastructure. And number 2, that any non-essential kinds of projects be put on hold as much as possible. I know some can't be held back, but some be put on hold to put all efforts toward this situation in North St. Louis. And downtown wants funds, but downtown is somehow surviving. It has needs, but North St. Louis is a mess. Surely we in St. Louis can do better than New Orleans with its 9th ward, still recovering 20 years after Katrina. Or can we? The RAMS funds are at least just a start. While the full RAMS funds are inadequate, why would the city not allot all of them to recovery? What city project is more important? The RAMS funds have been sitting there, and I know they're a source of income through interest and investment, but they are ready to be of real help. When the tornado hit this past city administration, and so far the current administration, even with citizen input, they had not come up with a specific plan for these RAMS dollars. Well, the plan became pretty self-evident on May 16th. I know it's simplistic, like I said, but I see it as a virtual God-given windfall. Nobody planned, really, we couldn't count on the RAMS, but when it came in here, there it was, a windfall that was just waiting to find its perfect use. And I've personally been involved up in North St. Louis because after the tornado, I wanted to help. And about 15 years ago, it was certified by the U.S. Forest Service as a certified chainsaw operator. And so for about 3 weeks straight after the tornado, I worked with other chainsaw volunteers, cutting trees off of roofs, off of the sides of houses, off of cars. I could mention all these names, Carlisa and Sherrick and other people I met, just wonderful people who just needed help. We worked with citizen groups, and I'm not pointing a finger at the city, but it was all volunteer groups, citizen groups, Action St. Louis, and 3 nonprofits. And the person online mentioned Dream Builders. Dream Builders was one of those nonprofits doing tarping of roofs and so. They set up a command center and supply center at 4142 MLK. Anyway, I met these homeowners and renters, and I wish I could tell some of their stories. I learned the streets of North St. Louis pretty intimately, ones that I'd heard about, but I know where they are now. And the needs are very dire up there, and I hope every alderperson has driven the streets, not just you all here, but the rest of the aldermen. I hope everyone has spent some time up there, driven the streets, and visited with individual citizens. Anyway, they need the citizens' help, and I'd love to be of practical help going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Mr. Hadley. That will be all. Is there anyone else in the room who wanted to sign up?
All right, seeing no one else, I'll go back in order seniority with questions from Alder people. I'll start back with our Vice Chair, Alderman Browning.
Thank you. I have no additional questions. And just again, thank you for everybody that came out to testify tonight and your time. We do hear you, and we do know that we need to pick up the effort.
Alderwoman Tanya.
Thank you, Chairman. Again, I just want to thank you all for coming out and participating in the process. I have just, the situation that's happening is really devastating, and it's getting freezing cold, so it's certainly an alarming situation. I have been in conversation with residents, have been talking to organizations on the ground, have talked to other elected officials, and I just hear a deep alarm and sense of concern. I think we have that in the city too as well. But I just want to make sure that you all, as much as I can, I think sometimes it can be easy to feel like there's a vibe from us that we are maybe not impacted, so you're not concerned. And I just really hope you all know, like, I do fully understand the urgency of the situation that is in front of us. And so, like, me personally, I would never direct you all's questions. I think you come to this space and you should ask about whatever you want to ask about. You should ask any question because your city government allocated millions of dollars to go towards things that are supposed to help the city and the recovery. So I don't think it's our place at all to direct you all's questions or comments. And I think that's exactly the point of this process, is so that we know what's on your mind, so that we know what the concerns are, and we're able to have an open and transparent conversation. So I just really thank you all for coming out and coming to us, even though you are still very much recovering from a tornado, even though we're in a freezing winter, even though there's a million things you're worried about, your housing, you're worried about your food. You could be literally worried about just surviving and living, and you're here today. So thank you. And whenever I have a mic, I will always try to be as much as I can an echo and for you all's concerns and questions. So, like, my first question is just to make sure that you all have the opportunity, given the comments that we heard and the frustrations from them, do you all have any responses to things that were uplifted from those who testified?
Yeah. Well, first, thank you, Alderwoman Tanya, for that space. I'll start by just saying we share the view that the recovery is not moving fast enough. There's one thing we know: the most visible signs of recovery is the removal of debris, and it is also fixing up homes. We have two core challenges that we face in that. One of them is that the aspect of removing debris out of communities is usually a huge support of our federal government. And every moment there's been delays, and that continues as we figure out things at the state level. I can't solve the fact of how hard it is. I will say I drive to the communities every weekend to remind myself of what's happening in North St. Louis, and I fight every day to try to move the processes of the federal government and the state government to support this as quickly as possible. I can say that while also saying I know that's not enough. I can say to people like Pat Miller, I know I went to her house personally, saw it. I saw her many emails that came through, but there are thousands of Pat Millers emailing a small team of 8 to 10 folks for a problem that is way too big for any city. And I also recognize some of the comments from Rep. Collins around all of our groups and so many groups who are doing things on the ground, who we can't possibly connect with every single group. And so I know, for example, they have about 2.9 million of MHDC funds, $1 million that's been awarded to the city and 1.9 million to the city. I also know the city has allocated 6 million, and we have not gotten that out fast enough. And so a lot of our job, unfortunately, for me, has been trying to set up the infrastructure that can actually scale to the response that people need and deserve, a system that has not existed and the system that we're building out. And so a lot of these concerns, even if we can't respond to every citizen comment, or I can't, or my team can't respond to every email, I do want to say one thing, which is that feedback is coming into our process. It is coming into decisions. It is coming into our priorities. And even if the response isn't quick and the response isn't direct, I don't want to think that that is shouting into a void. We can look at many aspects of our programs and even some of the funding that's here that's in direct response to some of those questions. We know that the housing piece is huge. We knew CDA and the existing home repair program by itself wasn't working. That's why we invested dollars to bring in a new contract construction management firm that can hopefully help speed up those efforts. We know that we have not had enough capacity, enough time in my office to be able to coordinate the groups on the ground, like the groups like MHDC, but quite frankly, even groups like the Long-Term Recovery Group that includes the Salvation Army and United Way. That's why we've invested in bringing in Key Strategic Group, who's currently in the process of helping organize both the Civic Leaders Recovery Advisory Committee and the Resident Community Advisory Committee, and also are starting to do that ecosystem map to figure out how we better bring all of the resources to all those groups from a small office to get that feedback and work. And so I say that all to say we know the progress isn't enough. We can also know that that also can mean that we're working as hard as we can. We know we have a lot to deliver, and we know we have an impossible mission to solve, and that's the resolve that we're faced with every day in our office trying to work through. And so I hope that I know that doesn't solve problems, but I hope it at least builds some sense of hope that we're trying and doing what we can.
Thank you. Sort of along the lines of kind of what we discussed and talk about, I know it kind of says right now that we're not here today to talk about like programs and strategy updates. When can we expect like more information on the specific deliverables and things that are more trackable outside of just dispersed money?
Yeah, so if that is a core focus that we want to make this kind of thing is going beyond funding to do that, we can do that. I know we are working on better tracking and things like that to start to prepare better reports to the Board of Aldermen. And we're also working through that to do that broader, more frequently to the public as well, directly in the impacted communities. We are working with KSG actively to build what that strategy and that work and that support is. What I didn't want to do is set up something that we couldn't maintain and keep. Didn't want to set up a report that we can't possibly consistently report out on. And so we recognize that the communications of the programs and the progress is a gap. So I can talk about what some of the metrics are of what we've done, and I can also say that they're not enough. But in terms of homes and things that have been tarped and boarded, we know that we've had over 200 homes that have been tarped and boarded up by the program. We know Pat Miller's was one that the contractor said they didn't feel it was safe to do that. So that's an example of one that did not get tarped, even though it was in our queue. We know that we've had about 287 rental units that are in contracting, about 443 building permits that have been issued. We know we've removed about 113,000 tons of debris out of the areas, out of the neighborhoods. That's been not the result of only the recovery office. What we have done is taken the debris that community and the groups that a lot of these groups have talked about that have moved debris to the curb. We have just done the part of picking it up and moving it to the landfill, but we know the large work is on private property that has been held almost completely by volunteers and community members. And so we've tried to support them as best we can while we get our programs stood up. That's been by providing dumpsters, and I don't have the latest numbers on that, but I know we've provided a ton of dumpsters directly out into for some of those volunteer days. We've had about 40 buildings demolished, about 6 in the city, about 6,000 trees cut or trimmed that we've supported. We have about 14,700 non-congregate shelter nights funded by the city through these allocation efforts. And so we are working to make a lot of these types of metrics more public and more consistent in public reports. And that's something our team is actively working on and building, and we'll be rolling it out over the course of the next month.
Thank you. I don't speak for the whole committee, but I do think what I would like to see is definitely like when we have these monthly meetings, reports on those numbers. Like I look at it like, okay, as a board of aldermen, we gave this whole chunk of money, and then the point of us having these conversations publicly is to be given like specific updates. So I think being able to say 200 roofs tarped or all the number of things that you all are doing. And I think what I would just say to you, Director, is like, I know you're standing up an office from scratch. And so I think sometimes, obviously, especially under a tornado, there's a lot of pressure and like not wanting to maybe say the wrong thing or being hesitant to say, listen, I'm still working on this strategy. I'm still building it out. Thank you for bringing those organizations forward. If you could send that to me an email, I will work on contacting them, and then like at next month's meeting, hey, last month we were told these organizations to connect with, this is what we've done. And I know that can be difficult as a leader where there's a lot of pressure because literally human lives and our city is on the line. But I think leaning into that type of transparency and almost vulnerability as far as being honest about it's hard work to do this stuff from scratch. There's no blueprint that we have to follow. There's no, you know what I'm saying? I think that's okay, but I think we got to balance that with making sure that we're letting residents know that we hear you, and that's why we want the space, so you can let us know what the issues are and what the gaps are, even if it is conflict and tension and people are upset. I really appreciate Representative Collins' comments. I know it's not the best, but I think, yeah, as a city, it sounds like we got some better coordination to do with state funding that's coming down and some of those organizations that are tied to that. I think we should just lean into that and say, hey, that's a weak spot. Thank you for bringing that forward. And then if she's willing to have the conversation, work with her, because it's just about the people and delivering from them. And we're doing it from scratch and there's no blueprint. So I just wanted to say that because I know this can be intense and pressure. I was a little bit of, I do not like being told what's not for today and feeling like I'm being directed in what I'm to ask, because I feel like we are to ask whatever the people, we are to answer what the people ask of us. And if the answer is that's a state thing, that's a federal thing, or hey, we're still developing that, thank you for bringing that. I've learned in my experience, like, better to be transparent about that. That was a lie. I don't know if you want to respond to that, but I know this can be intimidating, and I just want to make sure I'm being transparent with you and the public on like my feelings and thoughts on what we're discussing. Do you know, as far as one of the things I've seen mentioned is a lot of questions about United Way and their administration fee. Can you speak about that and what that is, as far as any profits they may be holding, or how are they, the funds that's being given that's going to United Way, how much of that is being used on administrative costs versus how much are going to the deliverable of services?
Yeah, I'll let Jim speak to it, but I believe it's about a 6% administrative fee, or 5.9%, which goes toward the administrative aspect of their teams who have to deploy the funds, run the meetings, review requested documentation. So typically administrative fees are usually between 10 to 15% a lot of times. So it is approximately at cost for how they've built that. But it's about 5.9% of the total funds allocated.
Thank you. I think this question is a little bit more specific to the outreach work that we've been kind of discussing, and I'm just pulling up the slide here. I guess this is just this is in this presentation, this is in general, but obviously there's just winter operations going on right now. What's kind of the status of like the outreach operations that are going on? I'm asking specifically because I got a number of questions after the fire that we had downtown and, you know, that big building that went up, I think it was in Alderman Aldridge's ward, about like how the money was being used to make sure they were doing outreach to folks. We know there's unhoused folks that are in buildings, knowing, you know, with the tornado, there may be additional folks. So just kind of the updates that you could give on just the outreach efforts. I know you spoke about the expanded beds a little bit, but I'm specifically curious about the outreach component of that, or if what organizations have maybe received funding that we know do outreach. Any information on that?
Yeah, so thank you for that. What I would say, so in terms of outreach, so we did have the people within DHS who have largely gone and directly reached out to kind of the community, especially the ones in our core hotspot of housing communities, to make them aware of shelter. We've also organized the respective buses to go to the popular sites where we know have been very, very active with the homeless community to make sure they're aware of those resources. Naturally, we don't have a large team to outreach, so our goal has been send out press communications to our alders, send out press communications to a lot of the groups on the ground. We also send out updates on where the shelters are to the base camp network, which is also highly tied into the unhoused community, with the hope that that's reaching a broader outreach. So that's been kind of the broader focus. As we look specifically for the tornado zone, we are currently actively working to solidify a contract to get groups to go help and partner with the city to go knock on every door, as well as make phone bank calls to every home that we have that's registered as a home that's unimpacted by the tornado, to connect them with resources now that we finally can put programs online. What we didn't want to do, and what we heard from the public, is we didn't want to just call and ask you for an update on your situation without anything to offer. Now those programs are stood up and we can actually connect them with programs. We're starting to make that direct outreach starting next week.
So if you're a resident, you're living in a tornado impacted area, or you live near a building and you know that there's a large amount of squatters, are we looking at what's in CSB to identify those? I'm just thinking of like the places that are a lot more likely to go up in flames and what we have in place. Do those vans, are they looking at what's in CSB? Should somebody, what, you know, does those vans go to those specific, how are we identifying kind of like vacant structures? Is that a part of this, like the outreach effort? Or if you know of a vacant structure as an alder or as a resident, how could you bring that forward and make sure that, because you mentioned the vans, so I'm just curious about how are those, I know you said popular points, how does that fit into the mix for residents that may know of popular points, or alders that may know of popular points that need to be outreached to?
So yeah, so one, I'd say if alders know, we need your help. So if you know there are areas or things that are common misses, please let us know. We've been relying on the trust of the outreach workers and in-house community who do this work to do that. We also know that we've sent and given flyers to people, and they have decided to go locate back into what's commonly called a VACO in it, which is to go in vacant property. There's a lot of dignity for people to stay in a place that feels like their own, even if to us it's a vacant property. So what we've been trying to do is do outreach. But if there are particular spots, we have spent the last week or two just trying to set up the shelter operations and the rally points themselves, that the full outreach effort is still largely in design. So we would welcome any input from alders. If you know there are areas in your respective wards that have a strong homeless population, we've already kind of sent out in constant press releases where the points are for transportation pickups, where the shelters are. If there are more that we can do, provide you with flyers that are more specific, or if it's a resident or things like that, please feel free to let us know. We're always open to ideas on how we can better drive outreach in this effort as we move through it.
Have we given funds to an organization for the specific purpose of conducting outreach? I guess one of the things that I know is like it's 3 outreach workers that we have in the city, so I just don't think that's enough to meet the needs. So I'm wondering, are we contracting it out to, have we given funds to an organization for the purpose of doing outreach? Because a lot of times in order to get those individuals to accept housing, you've got to be able to have ongoing conversation, multiple points of contact, which I just don't think the department, as well means, maybe have the capacity to do that. So are we giving funds to organizations or in conversations or RFPs out to give funds for organizations to do some of that work?
I'd love to talk to you more about that. Right now, our focus has been, we have never had enough beds for the people who do want to come in. So transparently, our first priority has been setting up enough beds for the people that if we simply offer them, come in. That has been a lot more demand than we've been able to handle. Like I said, I think we've gone from 100 beds to 185. So our focus right now has largely been setting up shelter capacity to make sure that we can meet the need that's there. But we'd love to kind of continue to brainstorm on how we can improve kind of the outreach side of things.
Okay, thank you.
Alderwoman Velasquez.
Thank you, Chair Aldrich. Thank you, members of the public, for being here, for sharing your stories. I know it is not always the easiest thing, but you are brave, so thank you. Thank you for doing it. Thank you for your continued advocacy on behalf of your community. Julian and Jim, just wanted to also thank you. I know it's probably not the most fun part of your job coming up here on TV to answer questions. Just a couple of questions for me. Some of them echo my colleague, Alderwoman Sinier. Just wanted to clarify, Mr. Nix, you said that the Recovery Office is working on a public portal to show basically what has been done so far, and did I understand that correctly?
So no, so we are working on more of a report to report out on progress and more think of it as a progress report. So think of the funding document you saw. We're building a similar one that actually starts to lay out the metrics of kind of what's been done. So that we're working on and going to make public. The thing I was talking about that's already public is the public dashboard tied to private property assistance applications, where people can go on and see who's applied and where it's at in the process so that people can have a public view of that. So
Okay.
that's online at app.strecovers.com.
Thank you for clarifying. And then, so, I mean, that's basically what I was asking too. Will there ever be sort of like a more live version of the public of basically how the funds are being distributed and where? That's a little bit more dynamic than a report.
We can talk more about that. It's not been, our current focus has been just kind of delivering that report and getting, quite frankly, the comptroller's office back in to match what we're seeing on our front end, which is really manual, and therefore makes it hard to make a public dashboard. So we are committed to doing, and we hope to continue with this, is to use this to make it public, but we are working to make sure that we can figure out a way to do more detailed reporting. So if someone wants to look at the organization by type and things like that, they can do that. Our systems just aren't built well for that, and we've been prioritizing dollars in certain areas, and that has not been one of them at the moment. But that's something that we're working to build to make that more available, so at least people can get a CSV that's tied to here's the groups that have been funded, that people can more readily see the details behind stuff.
Yeah, to echo what Alderwoman Sinier said, I do think that would be helpful. I mean, it's great that we have it, and thank you for providing it. Obviously, it's public money, and people always want to see where the money goes. A question on your metrics as well. I know that there are, obviously, I assume that there are metrics that are going to be evolving, but do you have metrics, are you developing metrics to see the success of these programs in particular, if they're working, and if they're not working, then how you're going to adjust?
Yeah, so right now, as we've been measuring it by the final outcomes, which is, we knew that we weren't putting enough things or board, so we are kind of tracking how much we're topping and boarding through our Kwame contract and how many of those have been through once that got launched. And of course, as we look at some of the home repair contracts, we are looking at the average time for how long it takes, but the major metrics we look at is the final outcome, which is have you touched a home? You can kind of see in the public dashboard that the accountability for Tetra Tech that matches how far are they moving people from application into actually doing the title clearance and doing the HSAs to just monitor that funnel. So we are looking at that across at least our major contracts. We of course can't monitor every contract in detail, but at least the really big ones, we're doing more direct monitoring of those outcomes.
And are the contracts, even the redacted versions, I assume there's some personal information, are those available online for people?
Let me follow up. I don't actually know after a contract goes through our registrar's office how that goes into public record. So I actually don't know the answer to that one.
Okay, that would be great. And then last metric-related question, just based on what we heard tonight, have you all been monitoring, or will you plan to in the future, sort of the metrics around response, I mean, customer service metrics, I mean, how many calls you're getting, if those calls are being answered, what like the average response time is from the city?
Yeah. So transparently, the city has never had a good customer service portal for its
Yeah,
respective programs.
yes.
Transparently, I've been trying to move that out of the city because the reality is, if you try to call CDA to get an update on your home repair, that staff will never have the capacity or the customer service function to do that well. So what we are trying to do is move most of that into our external contracts with groups like Tetra Tech. And on that one, we do have an active call center monitoring where we can look up the average response time to a call, how many calls were answered. When they give solutions, we're able to look at what those outcomes were or what they called about and kind of those connection to kind of some of those reasons. So that one we're looking at, but we don't have internal functions to monitor our own email responsiveness because we don't have a CRM system or anything to do the customer relationship management within the city. So we've been trying to put that in contract with the hope that eventually, as we stand up long-term city processes that don't exist, we can actually build some of that functionality. I don't have a way to track, did the CDA director or their staff respond to a question about an RFP or anything like that. Those systems, unfortunately, just don't exist at the moment.
Well, it's great that it sounds like we're going to be able to get some of that data in the future. Will that be part of the future, the city's, the future reports that for the public, some of those metrics once it's set up?
So I think it's a good question for us to have how deep to there's some which is, do we want to go to the higher level metrics? There are a lot of operational metrics that we regular reporting out from our vendors that we're not planning to make public, but if we think, hey, all of it's valuable, our focus was try to make it on the top outcome things I think residents care about, but we should have conversations with the public and the Board of Alders around what things people would hope to see, and we're happy to make most of those things. If we have it, I have no problem making the ones we have public. The biggest issue we have is getting into one central source and into a format that's viewable for the public.
No, I think that would be great. I mean, obviously, I think you're hearing that from us and from members of the public, and I think if you're building something scalable or replicable across city functions at some point, right? Not just this, but I don't think anybody in this room might disagree that customer service has never been a particular strong point of the city, and we should change that. So maybe this is an opportunity for us to do better in that area and do better by our residents and constituents. So that's all the questions I have. Thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
President Green.
Thank you. And thank you for coming this evening. Thank you to members of the public for coming out and testifying on this cold, and I don't know if it's snowing yet, but they said it was supposed to snow again tonight. So thank you for being here during that. So a couple of questions. First off, I want to say I appreciate this slide in particular. I don't know if everyone can see it, but the Recovery Office kind of program overview that breaks down kind of local, state, federal money and puts it into buckets. So, I mean, it's good to see that there's been, between local, state, and federal, there is $423 million available for recovery. I'll put it that way because it hasn't all been deployed. First question I have is kind of about that federal money there. Is $200 million all we're expecting to get from the feds?
So $200 million is all we have gotten at the moment. So that comes across 3 programs. It comes across the IA program, Individual Assistance Program. That amount of money has been going up still, but naturally they're not admitting new people into the Individual Assistance Program. But for those who have applied for rental assistance and then applied for continued rental assistance, we'll continue to see that number go up on those programs. So you can kind of see in the blue where it says it's kind of more like ongoing, no new applications. Those numbers may go up slightly, but they're not going to go up a lot. So that's kind of the 27 million from FEMA assistance there, plus the 16 million. So that's about 43 million of the total federal aid. The remaining 154 million is what we've constantly talked about around the private property debris removal that's been allocated to the state for the state to administer. And so that's the remaining 154 million. Is that all the feds will offer? It's all we have secured. But we have every intention to continue to advocate for more funds and have been in conversation around what's not covered that we know FEMA could cover. And then another big source of funds that we've already started to initiate conversations with from a federal level is CDBG grant dollars that are after disaster. The disappointing part about that is those funds usually take a year, sometimes 2 years, for that funding to actually reach impacted communities. There's direct people such as Sam Graves and others who we're partnering with on broader legislation that improves recovery, but unfortunately those funds are hard to know if and when they will come, especially under this administration.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's frustrating to see that, you know, little city like us has allocated 120 million and thus far, and we know we're looking under couch cushions every day to find more money, and that, you know, we only have 200 million committed from the federal government, and we're looking at a, you know, $1.5 billion plus disaster, which leaves us with a pretty big gap of where we need to get to. That kind of brings me to, I think, the second point, kind of with these meetings going forward, sort of piggybacking on some of what Alderwoman Saunier said, but I think, you know, some of the frustration we hear from residents is we can talk spreadsheets and numbers, and this amount has been allocated and, you know, encumbered and all of those different things, but if people aren't feeling it, then that seems to be where the disconnect is. And so I think as we kind of move forward, given that we have allocated quite a substantial amount of money, I think probably what we need, what the public needs more, is some of those programmatic updates and to understand where those gaps are. So, I mean, I can look at this and know that I'm sure that there are many more people who have asked for home repair than we are able to satisfy at the moment. And I think it would be helpful for us and for the public to kind of know what are we looking at in terms of those requests, and so we can better understand what that need is as we move forward. I have a question kind of about case management. I saw it here and now I can't find which page it was on. But are the folks that are doing case management only doing housing assistance, or is it overall assistance?
Yeah, so the current disaster case management is kind of is a holistic approach to the individuals enrolled in that program. And so that's kind of, so it is more broad. We are working and probably saw something to set up contracts to expand housing navigation and housing navigators.
I think that's what I saw.
For that. So we're currently working actively with the group, and we're going to have a contract actually go through ENA to kind of help continue to expand that effort, as well as we're looking at trying to reallocate some dollars that did not go out from United Way to fund additional case management for groups on the ground.
Because I'm wondering, you know, you getting thousands of requests into your office, that should be something that we're able to funnel over to case managers who follow up on that. Like that should not be a director of the Office of Recovery function. We should have people who can look at those needs and be calling and following up to make sure, you know, even if we can't provide assistance in that moment, at least they have heard from us and they have a line of communication and they know that there's somebody alive here with a heartbeat who, you know, cares. And so I'm wondering about, you know, have you thought about what it could look like to maybe more integrate some of that? I don't know if that's turning over your email inbox or what, but some ways so that that everybody's getting a response that contacts, even if they don't necessarily contact the, you know, correct case management line in order to get that assistance.
Yeah, so right now what we've been trying to bring online is bring up that capacity. If you remember from the last Board of Alder meeting, I think we only had 8 of the disaster case managers trained. Their full caseloads were full with people that we already knew needed support, which is why we haven't made that directly public. So now that we've expanded to 19, most of them are still through training. And so we're putting them through the backlog. I think the hard part is the number of people who need case management support versus the number of caseworkers is a really large gap. So we're expanding to 24 of disaster case managers I think we're talking about another 12 under the contract that we're talking about for the housing navigators, and we're working with that group to try to figure out how we can set up that apparatus. But to your point, yes, it doesn't exist yet. We are actively thinking about how to structure that to make that easier so that we can connect direct people to resources. But we're also working again so the private property assistance side can also get direct response. So they have case managers on that side that they can directly write to in a portal. And so I will tell the public if they've put things as comments into the portal and not heard back. I've not heard any feedback around whether or not the call center or things are negative. I've not heard any negative comments around that feedback portal. But if people are letting us know, but the metrics I'm seeing is showing a strong response rate from the outreach center, from answering calls and responding to comments. The only thing I'm hearing is they're maybe not getting enough active updates in the private property assistance application, which they're directly working on, being able to at least put something weekly into those chats to let people know the status of their application.
Okay, and I think that would be kind of another sort of data point going forward. If you're realizing, you know, we've allocated money for 24 case managers, it looks like we're going to need to add another, you know, did you say 19 or 12 or?
The current contract we're working on is 12 more.
It's 12 more.
Through next week's,
Okay.
especially in there.
And if we, you know, if we get to that 12 and we realize, you know, we're still over capacity, I mean, I think just kind of for budgeting going forward, being able to see like there are these gaps, and so how do we proactively start to budget for some of these things, because that case management piece in particular, I think, is going to make a lot of other aspects of a lot more easy if we're able to kind of have more of that constituent contact, like direct constituent contact.
Yeah, no, so exactly. So I think where we are at is we've kind of started to kind of create, what we want to do is make sure we spin up the infrastructure for those that we have with the dollars that we have. That's actively been a conversation both civic leaders, President Community Advisory Committee, and I know Jim directly working on trying to size up the unmet need across all of these vast areas to be able to kind of understand the size of that problem across things such as private property assistance, such as casework and case management support, rental assistance. So we'll know very quickly when we open up the rental assistance application, how fast does that 4 million go? Because many of them may have found support, they might have already moved. So we'll find out a lot more as we open up more of these avenues and most of these applications to understand the level of support needed.
Okay. And then I think kind of, well, I have a couple more things. The other, I guess, thing that's not here, and it's outside of government purview, but it's tangentially related because I believe the mayor's office has kind of appointments on the advisory committee, is there was a tornado recovery fund that was set up through the Community Foundation. My understanding, you know, the last number I got maybe a month and a half ago was there was only $2.5 million that had actually been raised into that fund by, you know, corporate and philanthropic donors. Which I'm going to be clear, I think that's absolutely ridiculous that public money, we can have $423 million. And I mean, I know there's been direct donations to some nonprofits and things like that, but that is a pitiful amount of money that our corporate and philanthropic community has put together. And so I guess I would like to understand, since some of those folks that have access to that corporate and philanthropic money are part of the recovery team, are they coming to the table with money and resources? Because it's one thing to give them a seat at the table, but if they're not bringing anything with them, at some point in time, we got to hold feet to the fire, because it's pretty unacceptable in my mind.
Yeah, and I think you raised good points, is that one, we probably should include the corporate philanthropic community in here. That was just one fund, so that fund was just the one that was set up directly by the city around that, but there was the Broader United Way fund that got set up. There was another one at the Community Foundation that got set up. I know that many groups like GSMF Foundation are actively giving to grassroots organizations on the ground. We know our corporate partners are as well. We have not had a way to track the mechanism of that broad level of support, but I will say it is way more massive than the number that we just talked about, the 2.4 million. But what that is something, I know we sized some of that early in the recovery effort, but we have not sized that full amount. So we'll note that as something to try to even add to this picture and figure out how we can get the philanthropic community, maybe themselves, to report and organize in a way that allows us to report.
And just more engaged. I mean, I think we did see a lot of engagement at the beginning. And, you know, unfortunately, I think, you know, there are some foundations that obviously are still focusing on day after day. But I also think, unfortunately, a lot of folks have moved on. And I think we, you know, need to remind them, because we're not going to be able to plug this gap, I think, just with public money as much as I would like us to. And so I'd really like to see a call to action for, you know, some of these folks that come to us asking for things all the time to, you know, come and show up for the city.
Yeah. Well, thank you for those comments, President Green. What I'll say is that from our view, since we've only had two Civic Leaders Recovery Advisory and Community Resident Advisory Committees meetings so far, and I know Jim is sitting on the one that's thinking about funding. Our philanthropic partners and our corporate partners are committed to helping the recovery. We have seen that very, very clearly in the signal. What they've asked us is like, where should it go? They've asked us to kind of figure out how do they help figure out how that gets allocated, what are the top needs, and so the unmet needs is both the request they're asking for and that we know we need to provide to help them think about those sources of funds. But we are seeing them fully aware and fully wanting to figure out how they can help in the recovery effort. And I know the mayor and I both have a meeting with a funders table that a group of the civic leaders have brought together to specifically talk funding and those commitments. So I want to say from those conversations and for this group who aren't privileged to be in those conversations, that we are seeing that desire to continue to support recovery efforts, which we're excited about.
Okay. And I think it would be helpful to integrate that, especially because that, you know, that fund of the community foundation is something that is connected to the city. And therefore it's something that we should be providing vision for and direction for. Because I'm trying to remember, but I think it was maybe the mayor's chief of staff is on the.
I sit on that now.
You sit on that now?
I sit on it now.
Okay.
Yep.
And so I think, you know, we need to be laying out a plan for how those dollars can be used to integrate into the way that we are using it, which might help to get more money into that fund. But we, you know, we need to, I think, on the city end, start figuring out how we organize that.
Well, what I can say, President Green, is I sit on that. We have been directly focused. Those dollars have been fully focused on housing. It has gone to groups like the Urban League, like the Salvation Army, to support the housing programs that they already have. We have been focused at fund, recognizing that the city's home repair and its rental assistance program, and those won't come on fast enough.
Right.
So we have directed those to Breathe the Bridge. So most of that 2.4 million has been allocated, and we're in talks about, and they continue to help fill the gaps in programs that maybe the city can't stand up fast enough. So for example, we're talking right now about funding some of the housing outreach work directly out of that fund, because it's just much faster to deploy than maybe doing through a city contract. And so we are thoughtfully working with them around that. And I have calls with them weekly.
Okay,
for
that
the
is
funding
good to know.
talk about those gaps.
And then just two kind of quick things. You know, I think going forward for some of the bigger issues too, like debris removal, you know, we've talked about having a separate hearing just on debris removal that I'm hoping we can still get scheduled before the board goes on recess, because I continue to get calls from contractors who are doing work on the north side who are very concerned about environmental impacts and remediation as, you know, a part of this process, given the amount of lead and asbestos and mold and environmental contaminants. I got a call from one of them actually on my way here tonight who was pretty downtrodden and said to me, you know, I've been working almost every day up on the north side, and there's a humanitarian crisis here, and I feel like nobody's doing anything. And I just, you know, that it resonated with me, because I think that's something that we keep hearing. It's just we're not, you know, we're not moving fast enough. But My ask would be that we do make sure we get that hearing scheduled on that, debris removal and environmental impact. I think I sent over like 25 questions or something like that to have answered. Because if large-scale debris removal is going to start in January, as we hope, I think it's really important that we have a clear understanding of all of those processes, and that our local ordinances that we fought hard to get passed around asbestos abatement and things like that are followed. Because we don't want to end up with the kind of secondary crisis here of an environmental crisis after we start to recover, because there's so many contaminants that's been left behind. So that's just another ask to please get that scheduled. Yep. And then the last thing I'll just say to Alderwoman Velasquez's comment. So we have been putting all of the E&A documents on Speak Up St. Louis. They are not full contracts, though. They're the sort of mini version that we get when we approve them. We unfortunately do not have a public contract database for the city. The county does have that, and it's something that we've been asking for many years and keep getting a lot of reasons why we can't do that. But I think at some point in time we have to figure out how to do it, because just from a transparency perspective, redact the things that we need to redact, but I think it helps the public to be able to see these
Pretty
contracts.
Sure they're anyway.
Say that again.
I'm pretty sure they're sunshineable anyway.
They can sunshine them, but you go to St. Louis County and you can just like search for them.
No,
a lot of governments are that way, it's just so much easier to be able to, not have to make somebody go through that hoop, because they can just go online and actually see our contracts.
I agree. So I'm saying if they're sunshineable, there's no reason not to make them public.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. So let's just figure out how to get it done.
Yep. We'll at least make sure we can figure out a short-term way for
these
recovery
contracts.
office contracts, and then we'll solve the big.
Yeah, maybe we start with a pilot of these contracts, figure out how we get those online, which hopefully can go into some broader city transparency processes. But I think that's it. I mean, I am, pleasantly surprised to see that. I think last month's meeting, we were seeing a lot of things very stuck. And, seeing some movement on the allocation of funds. I mean, it's still not great, the amount that has made it, out the door into the community, but it's better. And it, from the metrics provided tonight, it does look like things are getting faster. So I hope that, as we've been able to staff up, that we, when we come back in another month, we see that more money has made it out the door, and the time it takes to issue a contract has decreased even more. So I appreciate those metrics, and I'm glad to see that we're, finally starting to pick up some steam here. So with that, that's all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. All right. So for myself, on page 8 of the presentation, when we talk about 120 million out of 980 has been awarded and all that breakdown, since this is, supposed to be kind of talking about the Rams money, I know this talks about a broader spending of other funds that have also been spent throughout federal funds, reimbursement, and through CBG and all of that. But going back to the Rams money, that Rams interest from Board Bill 31, can you just explain a little bit? I understand that there's a lot of pot of money that you guys could be working with, but from the Rams interest, can you explain kind of what's the, I don't want to say delay, but why is out of contracted 19.3 only 6.9 has been spent?
Yeah. So I'll let Jim talk partially about this, but that's partially the fact that you get a contract, there's a difference in a delay between the contract and the invoicing. Most of our contracts are on a reimbursement basis, which meant that it pulls down as it spends. So you've contracted out and they don't spend. So for example, we know that with many contracts, like for example, we've had Tetra Tech working for months without the contract and without pay. And once we got the contract done and got the invoices through, they finally paid. So contracting, like the actual dollars out the door, isn't symbolic of the work starting. So one, I just want to acknowledge that there's a delay in that process itself. And so I'll let Jim talk a little bit more about some of the logistics of that for a second.
One of the other factors too, Alderman Aldridge, is that a lot of these larger contracts are over 6 or 12 months. And so you go through E&A, takes a month to get the contract done. It takes them a month to send you an invoice. That first month's invoice, if it's a $4 million contract and it's a 12-month, it might only be $300,000. So you're just gonna, it's gonna be a lag between, that further exacerbates the lag between contracted to spent.
And so something to add, and one of the things that Jim and I were talking about, we'll start to not only provide a view of the spin down, but also a forecast of how the spin should happen based on what we know about the nature of the contract. So for example, there's $1 million allocated to the recovery office. That's salaries. Salaries are paid biweekly, so that number is going to take a year to spin down. And so across our various contracts, depending on the work, that's kind of what might drive that. Another big one is a lot of these contracts are going into kind of aspects of like CDA or things like that, which we've already said those contracts are extremely delayed. And so as we speed those up, that'll help. A lot of them are also in, like a lot of these dollars are in our home repair program and our program, which we have already talked about. The repair program just isn't delivering houses quick enough, which means the dollars don't go out quick enough. And so as we continue to improve the operations of the programs, we'll also start to see funding speed up. But we'll start to share more of a direct view of how we expect it to spin down based on the nature of contracts in future meetings. We've been working to just put structure around one piece at a time. So now we've gotten to a good view of all of our contracts, how that works, how the E&A process works. Now we're building the process to actually forecast that out.
Gotcha. And also, I think what would be helpful, I know the contractor provided a documentation that, you know, because for the, like, you know, all these terms, I think kind of what the president say, people want to see the money out the door, right? But when we get these packets and they're online, you know, people see allocated and awarded and contract, and then you get to the big part of it and you see spent, and you're like, well, it's not a lot actually spent. We understand from the city side, there's all these hoops and hurdles. Jim, you talked about earlier how some of that processes has happened a lot quicker. I think also what would be helpful, I know the contract, or maybe it's just reaching out to the comptroller, they provided like the PO of like what has been awarded, and from that, like what has been spent and what has not been, has like a PO number to actually be spent. But just so I got this page 8, so I'm understanding it. So the RAM settlement and then the RAM settlement interest, and you guys are throwing in the board bill 93 and 94. 93 was impacted tenants fund, 94 was the board bill Alderwoman Tanya carried around, I want to say shelter, and as well as Clark Hubbard, not necessarily board bill 30 that we passed, but I see you guys adding that in. The first 2 buckets, when it talks about city emergency spending, FEMA, public assistance and reimbursement, is that the city? So is that just what we're getting reimbursed from?
So
that's the money that has spent by the city and responding to the tornado. So about 11 million of that is emergency response. So fire, police, the emergency operations center, other departments. And
so that money isn't technically what went to like housing, repair, anything. You're talking that bulk of it, and I think that's important as we talk about.
Yeah.
Out of 120 million, 98 has been awarded, 52 has been spent. If we just take out that 36.8, those funds was to make sure our first responders, our police, that has nothing to do technically with the tornado relief of like residents.
Well, in that 36, 11 is the emergency response. There's a chunk of debris removal. There's a chunk of repairs to city-owned properties, so like the Jewel Box and the Fallon Rec Center, stuff like that. So there is some repair stuff in there, but it is not. It is public assistance money. It's not individual.
Gotcha. So again, so I'm just hearing you right. That 36.8 is not residency relief. It is more, again, our fire, our police, the Jewel Box, so Fallon. So that 36.8, I'm not great at math. You minus that out of like 51. I wouldn't consider that as like residency spending. And you know, that's just me speaking of like when people were saying how this is being, with this presentation, I think is important, one, for the public to know, even though it's about Rams, what has been spent, you know, the total amount. But if we're going to talk about the total amount, when we talk about, you know, 120 and that 52, when we talk about that city emergency spending, that isn't necessarily spending on residents, correct?
Right, and I think that's why the two pages before Alderman Aldridge is really important, and why we try to break out where the source of funding is going is so you can see 11 million of that is in city emergency response. So the whole point of the first page was to break out the granularity so you can see, like, of course, shelter is a direct resident program. Home stabilization is a direct resident program. So we intentionally created this top sheet to help see that a little bit more. But what I'm hearing is being able to provide a deep dive into this chart might be a helpful thing to include, where you can see the breakout of how the federal funds are spent across these areas. Is that what I'm hearing? Just want to check.
I think what I'm saying is from this from the page 8 chart, I just want to, because we're not talking about what the president brought up, far as there has been total allocation 423, and you break that down, 120 from the city, 200 from the Fed. So we're gonna throw that out. You know, well, I won't say throw it out, but the money from the state, we still haven't got that 103 million yet. Like, the state hasn't given that, so that money is allocated, hasn't hit the ground. The federal funds is, as the president said, like, it's interesting we only got that much, but I'm just going back to like the city portion. So I'm just clear on, you know, what we're looking at out of the city portion of that 120. The 36 of it, like I say, is going to our city first responders and all of that, which we're getting reimbursed, going probably back like general revenue.
Pardon?
That reimbursement is going back to, is that going back to the city?
Yeah, that'll come back to the city.
Gotcha. Okay. And then that second bucket, other federal funds and state funds, only 7.9 has been spent. Contract says TBD, to be determined.
Yep, that's primarily because there's a lot of funds transparently that go through CA that they have been reallocating, that we are working to get more visibility into what those are. Our system, it's a technical thing, only can track things in our fund. We're trying to work with, if it came out of a different bucket, how we get a full view into that and how we get a view into contracts. It's something that we're working directly on with the new director of CDA, and Jim is personally working through to try to get more clarity on that. So it's TBD because we know that that's the amount of money that they've said is set aside there, but we're still trying to figure out, okay, is this allocated to contracts, and get visibility into that. So we hope by the next meeting we'll be able to provide more visibility and transparency.
Gotcha. And this is not to like try to be mean or anything. I know Jim is working, he's new to the city, to be very clear, learning this process. I mean, you're not too far new, also came in with Tornado. But if I'm looking at it right, and do I have it correct that technically, like, money from the city that has hit or allocated, or that, you know, for that is for the community that has been spent, is completely out the door? I would take that bucket of the RAM settlement, the 6.9, that talking about the spent part, correct? Money out the door, that would be going to community, to 6.9. And money out the door that's going to community also is that RAM's interest, Board Bill 9394, that 0.3. Those are the two buckets, and maybe the 7.9, like money out the door in community, right?
So I will say, well, I won't say it's money out the door to community. That's money out the door to the groups performing the work. That does not mean the groups on the ground haven't deployed much more resources than that. So, for example, we know we have been setting up shelters for pretty much the last 8 days tied to sheltering. That work has happened, that is happening live with residents. This 300,000 that's here is only the work we did with that group from November 9th through the 11th, right? So there is a delay between the services being provided to people on the ground and the dollars going out the door. So you're right that the dollars out the door to those groups is that much, but that doesn't mean the services to the community are at that value. Does that make sense?
Is that because you're saying that the process of like contracts and awards are happening, or are you saying work is happening and people gonna get paid on the back end? Or?
Yeah, it's the reimbursement process. It takes time. So they expend for a month and then they ask for the dollars, and that's even if they bill us right away. So we know some entities, don't bill us right away if their balance sheet can hold it. So there's a lag between services performed and getting the invoice and paying it.
I was talking to the comptroller about it, how do we look at providing resources on the front end with certain documentation so people don't have to wait, but that's a different conversation.
Yeah, but I do want to say, so it's not a different conversation because that's something we're working on. So for example, with the contracts that we're doing right now for homeless services, we are working with the comptroller's office to do advances in advance of payment. So we're not going to do all of it because we don't want to give them $2 million if they only end up spending 1.5. But for groups, especially the smaller groups and the groups who can't float the balance sheet, we are being intentionally thoughtful about that. But transparently, if we have a bigger corporation who has the balance sheet and we get interest on it, I'm not pushing a rush to get those funds out the door if they can float it. So we're focusing on if there is a contract with a smaller provider who can't absorb reimbursement, we are focused on getting
I agree. There's definitely not a one-size-fits-all, and I think even post-tornado, that's something we need to look at for other contracts as well. I know like the health department does that, but good to know that there's already a precedent out there to know that that can be done.
We're working on it.
Okay. Page 12. Impact attendance fund. It says awaiting allocation upon pilot is complete. So the board just allocated $1 million for impact attendance fund. It sounds like between Department of Human Services and Employment Connection, that program is now officially up and running. That was due not to the $1 million, but with other ARPA dollars. Can you explain what is this pilot that you guys are looking for? Are you not looking to go with the same vendor who's already doing it? Or are you going to
So
reset?
our goal is to check to see how the program runs, make sure we feel good about the vendor and the work, and then allocate more dollars. So right now they're spending down $240K that's already been allocated to the alderman from the Board of Aldermen. Assuming that goes well, we'll continue to allocate the rest.
Gotcha.
We have an intent to keep the program, but given it's a new vendor, similar to like an SLS, we have more money to spend on shelter, things like that, but we allocate an initial amount, see how the program goes, and then we allocate more as we go.
Gotcha. Yeah, I would hate if, we would change vendors during that instead of making sure that program run through. And I would assume all the vendors that are now doing work, wouldn't this all be new for them as well? Like for as a tornado, United Way doing this through, or, working with non-for-profits to get money out the door, or some of the other vendors that, I love Diamond Divas. This would be the first time like the city partner with Diamond Divas to do like distribution. When same thing, I'm going back to Impact Attendance Fund. This is a new program, not only for them, but this is a new program for all of these non-for-profits, correct?
Yes, that's true. But we already had a contract with the organization that's doing the Impact Attendance Fund, so we didn't need to do a new contract for that work to start. The other groups, when we do a setup of a new contract, we set it up in that way. But even United Ways, for example, we set that up in their payment method where they get to pull down in tranches upon approval, upon showment of the work. We just didn't do that with the Impact Attendance Fund because that contract was already in place, predating it. So we just wanted to focus on launching that application, and then we'll do an amendment to add more dollars to it based on the program.
Gotcha. I think that is all my questions that I have tonight. Are there any outstanding questions from committee members? Alderwoman Tanya.
One is I saw a slide that it says 36.8 million in federal money has been allocated and spent. And then when you were talking, you were just saying that the federal government delayed that allocation. So can you just expand on that?
No, so what that is, so all these these costs in that top row to do public debris removal and emergency response, they're all eligible for reimbursement from FEMA. And that process, we've gathered, documented, submitted, and gotten through an audit process to get the funds approved. Not all the 36, but a big chunk of the 36. And the payment should have happened a month or two ago, and they just haven't been paid yet. And that government shutdown for 43 days in October and November just really delayed reimbursement. You're talking about the
Yeah.
the amount submitted to FEMA?
Yeah. I was just curious about, you mentioned that obviously the federal government shut down, so I just wondered if there was a relationship there.
Yes.
This might be a question more for Julian, I'm not sure, but I know we talked a little bit when food stamps shut down. You guys were working on some health access grants, and I know I had some conversation, at least with Dr. Pearson's office about it. Do you know anything about the status of that food access grant that we did?
Unfortunately, I don't know what that one is. So that'd be a question for Dr. Pearson.
Okay. I think it can be a conversation that we can have offline. We kind of talked about it a little bit, but I think we had a different, they were here with us when we were discussing.
Let me
this.
know, and I'm happy to try to get an answer.
Okay, thank you.
All right, any other questions? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Nix, Mr. Jim, for being here today. Also, I want to thank all the community members that came out as well, that's watching virtually, that continue to stay plugged in during this process, and continue to advocate and not only hold us accountable, hold the recovery office accountable, ask certain questions that is needed to make sure in the next presentation that is out there, or your stories and comments that you bring up is actually also important for us just to know how we move forward as a city. And I think we all continue to say we definitely need to move faster as a city to continue to help as many people. But thank you for continuing to show up and show out and coming out today. Madam Clerk, do we have any written testimony? Announcements. I have an announcement. This Wednesday at 10 a.m. This Wednesday coming up. Today's Wednesday, so this Wednesday, not as of today. Coming up, we will hear Board Bill, I think 106, President Green's bill on bus rapid transit. So that will be at 10 a.m. I also sent out an email to all budget members, and since the public is here, for future budget dates around Rams interest meetings, they are already set. I will be sending them to the clerk. Thanks to Mr. Jim with coordinating these. The future dates going into next year will be January the 8th, which is a Thursday. Typically, they're on a Wednesday, so okay. So we can work with a Thursday. It'll be Thursday, June 8th. Wednesday, June 28th. January. Okay, let me start over. Thursday, January 8th. It's been a long day. Wednesday, January 28th, and all these meetings will be at 6 p.m., and they will be up on the city website, but want people that's here and watching to mark it on your calendar. Wednesday, February 25th, as well as Wednesday, March 25th, which is 10 days after my birthday, if anybody wants to bring anything for the chairman. Again, those dates is Thursday, January 8th, Wednesday, January 28th, February 25th, and March the 25th. And again, this Wednesday coming up, we will be hearing Board Bill 106, President Green's bill around bus rapid transit at 10 a.m. right here in the Kennedy Room. You can come in person, or you can also watch online on YouTube, or you can join the link that our clerks work so hard to put up on our Board of Aldermen website, and you click on it to be part of the conversation. Raise your hand, and it'll bring you over so you can testify via Zoom. Any other announcements from any committee members? Seeing none, I will make, or Madam Clerk, I would like to excuse the alderman from the 5th, and with that,
Quick announcement.
we did move on to the next item, but sure, we could back up the bus, Alderwoman Tanya. You are recognized on the previous item.
Thank you. I just wanted to announce that there is a utility assistance fair on Wednesday, December 10th, from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. That will be at the Child and Family Empowerment Center, which is 4145 Kennerly Avenue, St. Louis, Missouri, 63113. Representative Collins and a number of organizations are coming together to assist with that. So again, 10 a.m. to p.m. There will be a number of folks on site offering utility assistance on site at that event. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Again, excuse the alderman from the 5th, Madam Clerk, and I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved by the alderwoman from the 7th, second by the alderwoman from the 6th. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.